It started with silence. An eerie, suffocating silence that hung over Montecito like a heavy fog. Neighbors who were used to the faint laughter echoing from the Sussex mansion said they noticed something different that morning. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The gates, usually half open with security calmly pacing outside, were locked. The black Range Rover that always carried Prince Harry to his morning workouts was gone. And yet, inside the mansion, lights flickered at odd hours, voices were raised, and for the first time in months, tension seemed to replace peace. This wasn't just another disagreement between a husband and wife. What unfolded inside that grand estate was the beginning of one of the most shocking royal meltdowns in recent years, a confrontation that would see Prince Harry, the man who once walked away from the royal family for love, forced to walk away from the woman he gave it all up for. But what really happened? What did Harry find that was so devastating, so beyond forgiveness, that it drove him to do the unthinkable, to send Meghan Markle out of their Montecito home with no warning? That's the question that has set social media ablaze, triggered headlines from Los Angeles to London, and reignited the old wounds of a royal love story that once captivated the entire world. For years, Harry and Meghan were seen as the modern face of monarchy. Independent, bold, and defiant. They turned their backs on royal duty for what they called freedom. They promised to tell their story on their own terms, to live privately, to raise their children far from the royal spotlight. But that dream has now shattered into pieces, replaced by suspicion, heartbreak, and betrayal. According to whispers from inside Montecito, the tension had been building for weeks. Harry had grown distant, his usual warmth replaced by quiet frustration. Friends close to the couple say he had begun spending more time alone in his study, scrolling through messages, rewatching old footage, and questioning things that never used to bother him. Meghan, meanwhile, was reportedly spending long hours away from home, her calendar filled with business meetings that no one in Harry's circle could verify. But it wasn't until one quiet evening, an evening that was supposed to be just another private night in, that Harry's world was turned upside down. Imagine the scene. The sun dipping below the California hills, a calm breeze rustling through the palm trees that surrounded their estate. Inside, the faint glow of candles flickered against the marble countertops. Meghan had left her phone on the kitchen island, its screen lighting up every few minutes with a new message. First, Harry ignored it, but when one notification flashed across the screen, an unfamiliar name, a message that sounded far too intimate to ignore, his curiosity overpowered his restraint. That moment changed everything. It wasn't just the message itself. It was the tone, the familiarity, the kind of warmth that only comes from secrecy. Sources say Harry scrolled through the conversation, each line pulling him deeper into disbelief. The words didn't sound like casual friendship. They carried weight, intimacy, confession. And as he read, it became clear. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was betrayal. What do you do when the person you sacrificed your entire world for betrays you? What goes through the mind of a man who abandoned his family, his title, his home, for love, only to realize that love might have been built on lies? In that moment, Prince Harry wasn't a royal. He wasn't the Duke of Sussex or the son of King Charles. He was just a man, standing in his own kitchen, heartbroken and disoriented. Those close to Harry say he didn't shout, he didn't lash out immediately. He simply froze. The kind of silence that comes when pain is too sharp to express. Minutes passed before he took a deep breath, placed the phone back down, and walked outside. The night air hit him cool and heavy. It was the same air that once carried his laughter, the same night sky under which he dreamed of a new beginning. But now it felt foreign. They say he stood there for almost an hour alone, trying to make sense of what he'd seen, trying to decide whether to confront Meghan or wait for her to come home and confess. But confession never came. When Meghan returned later that night, she was met not by a husband eager to greet her, but by a man who had reached his breaking point. Witnesses claim that even the security staff outside the property could sense something was off. The driveway lights, usually dimmed by 10 p.m., were still blazing. The front doors were unlocked, as if someone had stormed out in frustration. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Harry's voice, usually calm and grounded, carried a tremor that few had ever heard. The words came out quietly at first, questions, disbelief, the kind of emotional confusion that only comes from realizing that someone you trusted completely might have deceived you. "Why?" he reportedly asked her. "Why would you do this?" There were tears, raised voices, long pauses where neither knew what to say. The argument wasn't just about infidelity, it was about everything that had led them here. The lies, the distance, the media games, the endless chase for fame and validation that seemed to consume them both. What started as a romantic fairy tale, a prince defying his royal family for love, was now unraveling into a public tragedy. The neighbors who spoke later described hearing loud noises, slamming doors, and, eventually, a car engine starting near midnight. Some claimed they saw security move discreetly around the property, escorting someone out. By dawn, one of Meghan's personal staff vehicles was spotted leaving the driveway. And from that moment, speculation exploded. Was it true that Meghan had been caught cheating? Was the relationship finally beyond repair? Was this the end of the Sussex story, the end of happily ever after in Montecito? The public didn't know. But what they did know was that something had changed. The couple that once moved in perfect unison had gone completely silent. No public appearances, no joint statements, no smiling photos from charity events. Nothing. Behind the silence, the palace reportedly grew anxious. Even though Harry and Meghan were no longer working royals, their every move still reflected on the monarchy's image. Palace aides quietly monitored the situation, unsure whether to step in or let the storm pass. After all, this wasn't just about a marriage. It was about the reputation of an institution that had already endured more than its share of scandals. Meanwhile, Harry reportedly withdrew entirely. Friends couldn't reach him. His team described him as focused, cold, and resolute. The man who once defended Meghan fiercely in public now refused to mention her name. He didn't issue a denial or a defense. He simply acted, and his action was swift. By the next morning, staff members were seen removing Meghan's belongings from certain areas of the house. Security protocols were quietly updated. Visitors' lists were changed. Meghan, sources claimed, had been asked to take some time away from the residence until things could be sorted privately. To the outside world, it looked like a marital pause. But inside the gates of Montecito, everyone knew what it meant. It meant the end of trust, the end of patience, the end of pretending that everything was fine. Harry had reached his limit, and though no official statement has confirmed what truly happened that night, one thing is undeniable. Something irreversible took place inside that mansion. Something that changed the tone of their marriage, perhaps forever. The public wants answers. The palace wants silence. But Harry and Meghan, once the most modern, glamorous couple to grace royal headlines, are now living two separate realities. One, a man rediscovering who he is after betrayal. The other, a woman fighting to protect what's left of her image. But what comes next? What really happened in the hours after Meghan was reportedly asked to leave? Who is the mysterious person at the center of it all? And will Harry ever forgive her or himself for letting things reach this point? Because the night Meghan Markle left Montecito was not just the night a marriage cracked. It was the night the last illusion of a royal fairy tale finally broke. And what happened after that would shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. From the outside, Montecito had always seemed like a paradise. The rolling hills, the ocean breeze, and the sprawling estates lined with palm trees all painted a picture of peace and privilege. To anyone driving past the gates of the Sussex mansion, it was just another quiet Californian morning. Birds sang, the gardens bloomed, and the house stood still under the soft light of dawn. But inside, things were far from calm. Inside, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were no longer living the life they had promised each other when they fled Britain for freedom. The dream had soured, and the cracks that once hid behind smiles and interviews were finally starting to show. At first, the signs were subtle, so subtle that only those closest to them could see the difference. Harry had started waking earlier than usual, spending long hours in his private study, the one that overlooked the garden where he used to play with Archie. He wasn't reading or working. He was thinking about how things had changed, thinking about the strange phone calls Meghan took late at night, thinking about how she often smiled at her phone when she thought he wasn't watching. He didn't want to believe anything was wrong. He had always been the one to defend her, the one to shield her from the criticism of the press, from his family, from everyone who doubted her intentions. But now he found himself doubting too. Friends who visited noticed the distance. Where there was once laughter and warmth, now there was politeness, a practiced civility that barely covered the tension beneath. Meals were quiet, conversations short. Even Archie's innocent laughter seemed to echo awkwardly through the halls. The house that once felt like a refuge from the chaos of royal life had become a fortress of silence. Harry had grown accustomed to being misunderstood by the public, but being misunderstood by his own wife was something else entirely. There were moments he would walk past her office door, hearing her on video calls, her tone cheerful and professional. But as soon as she noticed him nearby, her expression would change. The warmth vanished. The call would end abruptly. She'd smile and say she was just discussing new opportunities. But what opportunities, Harry wondered, required so much secrecy? It wasn't only the calls. It was the subtle shift in her routine. Meghan had always been ambitious. He loved that about her. But lately, her ambition had taken on a strange edge. There were events he didn't know about until they appeared online. There were people she mentioned as colleagues but never introduced. He wanted to ask, but every time he tried, she dismissed it with a wave, saying he was being paranoid. Paranoid. That word stuck with him. It reminded him of his past, of the way the press painted his mother, of how they painted him when he dared to show emotion. He didn't want to be paranoid. He wanted to be sure. And so, he started to notice everything. The time she left the house, the way she locked her phone, the nervous laugh she gave when a message came through during dinner. But suspicion is a dangerous thing. It eats at you slowly, turning love into doubt and peace into turmoil. Harry tried to push it away. He told himself it was just stress, that all couples go through difficult phases. But every time he looked at her, he felt the distance growing wider. Then came the charity gala. It was supposed to be a simple public appearance, one of those carefully managed events to remind the world that the Sussexes were still working, still relevant, still united. Meghan looked flawless, smiling for the cameras. Her hand looped through his arm as they posed on the red carpet. But Harry could feel the stiffness in her touch. It wasn't affection. It was performance. That night, as they returned home, the silence in the car was louder than ever. Meghan stared out the window, scrolling through her phone, while Harry sat beside her, his jaw tight, pretending not to notice. When they reached the mansion, she went straight upstairs, saying she was exhausted. He lingered in the driveway, watching her disappear into the house. Something in his gut told him this wasn't just fatigue. Something was wrong. He walked through the house slowly, each step echoing on the marble floor. The walls, lined with framed photos of happier days, seemed to mock him. There they were, smiling in Botswana, laughing in Canada, holding hands at their wedding. Every image told a story of love and devotion. But standing there now, it all felt like a lie. Harry poured himself a drink and sat by the fireplace. The warmth didn't comfort him. He thought about his family, his brother, his father, the grandmother he'd disappointed. He had left all of them behind for this woman. He had given up his military duties, his royal security, his home in the UK, everything he knew, because he believed Meghan was his forever. But now, he wasn't sure if she ever truly saw him as anything more than a chapter in her own story. He didn't want to admit it, but even his friends back in London had warned him. Some had said she would change once she had the life she wanted. Others said she was too drawn to fame, too addicted to the spotlight to live quietly. Harry had dismissed them all. He believed love was stronger than cynicism. But as he stared into the flames, he wondered if he had been the naive one. Days passed. Meghan became more distant. She spent more nights out, claiming to be meeting producers, brand partners, and advisors. Harry, however, wasn't invited to any of these meetings. When he offered to join, she'd smile politely and tell him it wasn't necessary. "They just want to talk business," she would say. But he could tell she didn't want him there. One morning, Harry's friend from London called. They spoke briefly about old times, but before hanging up, his friend hesitated. "Mate," he said quietly, "you might want to keep your eyes open. There's talk going around. I'm not saying it's true, but it's out there." "Talk about what?" Harry asked. "About Meghan. About someone she's been seen with. Just be careful." The line went dead. For the rest of the day, Harry couldn't focus. He walked through the house in a daze, wondering if it was possible. If all the whispers, the glances, the late nights could mean something more. His chest tightened at the thought. He didn't want to confront her, not yet. He wanted proof. Something real. That evening, as Meghan prepared to leave again for another meeting, Harry watched her carefully. Her perfume lingered in the air, familiar yet distant. She smiled as she adjusted her coat, said she wouldn't be long, and disappeared through the door. The sound of her car fading into the night left him standing alone in the hallway, surrounded by silence once more. An hour later, he made a decision. He opened his laptop and began checking public records of the charity event they had attended earlier that week. Photos, videos, social media clips, anything that might explain her strange behavior. That's when he noticed something peculiar. In one of the photos, Meghan was speaking closely with a man Harry didn't recognize. Their heads were tilted toward each other, their smiles a little too familiar. She hadn't mentioned him before. He zoomed in on the image, studying every detail. The man's hand brushed against her arm. She wasn't pulling away. They looked comfortable, too comfortable. His stomach dropped. He tried to dismiss it, to tell himself he was reading too much into it. But the unease wouldn't go away. It only grew. That night, Meghan returned home later than usual. Her explanation was brief: traffic, a delayed meeting, exhaustion. She kissed his cheek, went upstairs and locked the bedroom door. Harry stayed downstairs for hours, thinking. The clock ticked past midnight, but sleep never came. All he could hear was his own heart pounding. There was something wrong behind the palace gates of Montecito. Everyone could feel it. Even the staff, who had been trained to remain silent, whispered among themselves when Harry wasn't looking. They could sense the tension, the sorrow, the quiet unraveling of what once seemed unbreakable. The fairy tale was falling apart. Harry didn't know it yet, but the truth was closer than he imagined. The clues were already around him, buried in text messages, in phone calls, in photos she thought he'd never see. The moment of discovery was coming, and when it arrived, it would change everything. Because sometimes the worst betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from the person you trusted most. And deep down, Harry was beginning to realize that the story he thought he was living, the story of love against all odds, might have been a lie from the very start. The night that changed everything didn't begin with a confrontation. It began with a quiet hum, the kind of stillness that usually means nothing, but this time it carried weight. Harry was alone in the living room, the dim light of a single lamp glowing against the walls. The house was silent. Meghan had gone upstairs hours ago, claiming she had work to finish before bed. Normally, Harry wouldn't have thought twice about it, but something felt different that night. There was a strange nervousness in the air, the kind of energy that makes your heart beat faster even when nothing is happening. He turned off the TV. The silence grew heavier. That's when he saw it, the faint light of Meghan's phone left on the counter. It wasn't unusual for her to leave it charging there, but the screen was unlocked, a text thread still open. It was the tone of the messages that caught his eye first. Short, intimate, personal. There was no name saved, just an initial, a single letter. He couldn't move at first. His instincts told him to look away, but curiosity, pain, and fear fought him all at once. His fingers hovered above the screen before he finally gave in. The first few messages were harmless, casual, but as he scrolled, the tone shifted. The words were playful, flirtatious. Then, unmistakably, romantic, compliments, private jokes, late-night confessions that no married woman should be sending to anyone other than her husband. Harry's throat tightened. He read the lines again and again, hoping he had misunderstood, that it was some kind of miscommunication or misunderstanding. But it wasn't. There was no ambiguity in those messages. Whoever this person was, they knew Meghan in a way no one else should. He scrolled further. His pulse quickened. One message read, "I can't stop thinking about last night." Another followed, "You make me feel seen again." Seen again. Those two words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a wound to his identity. Hadn't he given her everything? Hadn't he been the one who left his family, his home, and his title so she could finally feel safe and free? And yet, he took a photo of the messages on his own phone, just enough to remember what he saw. Then he placed her phone back exactly as it was, careful not to make a sound. He barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the words again. The teasing tone, the familiarity, the implied history. His mind replayed every argument, every unexplained trip, every strange pause in conversation. It was as if the puzzle pieces of the last few months were finally clicking together, and the picture they formed was unbearable. When morning came, Meghan acted as though nothing was wrong. She made coffee, asked him if he wanted toast, and talked about her upcoming meetings. Harry watched her closely, studying every gesture. Her voice was calm, her eyes steady. She didn't look guilty. That almost made it worse. It meant she was confident he didn't know. Throughout the day, Harry moved like a ghost. He went through the motions, answered emails, made a few calls, but his thoughts were somewhere else. He had to know who that mysterious initial belonged to. The not knowing was eating him alive. Later that afternoon, when Meghan stepped out for her usual walk, he returned to the phone. This time he looked deeper. There were voice notes, small snippets of laughter. The man's voice wasn't completely clear, but it was enough for Harry to recognize something. An accent, maybe American, maybe not. The messages weren't daily, but frequent enough to suggest closeness. And then, the one that ended his denial completely. "Next time, let's be more careful." He almost found out. Harry's stomach turned. The words burned into his mind. He set the phone down, pacing back and forth, gripping his hair in disbelief. It wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was proof. But proof of what exactly? An affair? Emotional betrayal? He didn't know yet. But whatever it was real. And it was enough to break him. He walked outside, needing air. The California sun hit his face, but he didn't feel its warmth. The once perfect view of the ocean felt meaningless now. The home he built as a symbol of love had become a prison of lies. That night, he didn't speak to Meghan. She noticed the distance but didn't ask why. Maybe she sensed something was wrong, or maybe she didn't care. When she finally went to bed, Harry stayed downstairs again. Hours passed before he stood, walked quietly to the office, and opened his laptop. He typed the man's name from the messages, just the first name, followed by Los Angeles, producer, and Meghan Markle. First, nothing came up. But then, after a few searches, a pattern emerged. A name linked to a series of Hollywood events. A man she had been photographed with months earlier. One of the business contacts she claimed to be working with on a charity initiative. The same man who had been at that gala. The same man Harry had seen in those photos where they stood too close. The realization hit him like a punch. The timing, the excuses, the secrecy. It all lined up. He closed the laptop slowly, his breath uneven. Every memory he had of Meghan in recent months began to blur together. Her laughter felt rehearsed. Her affection, mechanical. He couldn't tell which moments were real anymore. The next morning, he confronted her indirectly. Over breakfast, he mentioned the name casually, watching her reaction. For a second, barely a second, he saw it. The flicker of panic in her eyes. The way she blinked too quickly before recovering. She smiled and brushed it off, saying he was just a professional contact. But that single flicker was enough. He knew. From that moment on, every interaction between them was charged with tension. He tried to act normal, but the knowledge sat heavy between them. He could feel the truth every time she spoke, every time she avoided eye contact. He began to wonder how long it had been going on, when it started, whether it began before or after they left the UK. The uncertainty was torture. One evening, he decided he couldn't keep silent any longer. As Meghan prepared dinner, he walked into the kitchen, his face pale and calm but his eyes cold. She turned and smiled faintly, asking if he wanted wine. He didn't answer. Instead, he placed her phone on the counter. "Who is he?" he asked quietly. She froze. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice steady but her body tense. "The messages," Harry said. "The calls. The photos. Don't lie to me." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she laughed. A nervous, sharp sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Harry, this is insane. You're listening to gossip again, aren't you?" But he didn't blink. "I saw the messages." The room fell silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rustle of the palm trees outside. Meghan's face hardened. The act dropped. "What exactly did you see?" she asked. "Enough," he said. They stood there, facing each other. Two people who once promised forever, now separated by suspicion and pride. The air between them was thick with things unsaid. Meghan sighed, turned away, and whispered, "You wouldn't understand. Try me," he said. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked out, her footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving him standing there, surrounded by silence again. That night, Harry didn't follow her. He didn't plead. He didn't argue. He knew the truth wouldn't come from her lips. It already lived in those messages. As he stood by the window, watching the moon rise over Montecito, he realized something painful. The woman he thought he knew had already left him long before she walked out that night. The messages weren't just proof of betrayal. They were proof that their love had faded long ago. And for the first time since leaving the royal family, Harry felt completely alone. The confrontation wasn't planned. It came suddenly, like a storm breaking through the calm. Harry had spent days carrying the weight of what he'd discovered. Every conversation, every shared glance, every mundane task felt like a lie stretched across fragile glass. By the time that evening arrived, he could no longer keep it contained. He needed the truth. Not half-truths, not excuses, but raw honesty. The California sun was melting into the horizon, washing the Montecito estate in gold and amber light. It should have been beautiful, peaceful even, but for Harry, it felt like the closing act of something sacred. He stood near the wide glass doors that opened into their garden, watching the sunlight flicker across the ocean in the distance. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, tired, hardened, and uncertain. When Meghan's car pulled into the driveway, his heart started pounding. The sound of tires on gravel echoed through the quiet property. She stepped out gracefully, wearing sunglasses, a tailored blazer, and that effortless confidence that once charmed him beyond reason. In her hands, a phone and a designer handbag. Her head was high, her smile faint, like someone who knew exactly how to perform calm under pressure. Harry waited by the door. She saw him as soon as she stepped inside. For a moment, their eyes met, and the tension was almost unbearable. "Hey," she said lightly, her voice even. "You're home early." "I never left," Harry replied, his tone low and steady. She hesitated, setting her bag down. "Okay. What's going on?" Harry took a deep breath. "We need to talk. And this time I don't want rehearsed answers. I want the truth." Her brow furrowed slightly, the corners of her lips twitching into a practiced smile. "Truth about what?" "Don't do that," he said sharply. "Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about." The smile faded. The silence stretched long enough to make the ticking of the wall clock audible. She crossed her arms, her body shifting slightly away from him, a subtle act of defense. "You're making something out of nothing again," she said. "You've been paranoid lately, Harry. Ever since. Since I found out," he interrupted. The words hung between them, heavier than the fading sunlight. Meghan's breath hitched, but she didn't speak. He could see her eyes dart to the table, where her phone usually sat. Empty. She realized then that he'd seen more than he should have. "Who is he?" Harry asked quietly. "The one you've been messaging. The one you called the only person who understands me." Her shoulders stiffened. "You went through my phone?" He laughed bitterly. "That's what you're focusing on? Not what I found, but that I found it." Her voice rose slightly. "That's a violation, Harry. You can't just invade my privacy." "Privacy?" He stepped closer, his tone cracking under the pressure. "You're talking about privacy while you've been sneaking around behind my back? Don't talk to me about boundaries when you've already crossed every single one." Meghan's eyes flashed with anger. "You're twisting things. You always twist things when you feel insecure." "Insecure?" Harry repeated, his voice trembling. "You think this is about insecurity? This is about betrayal." He turned away, pacing, running his hand through his hair. The sunlight had faded completely now, leaving the room draped in twilight. Only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of waves filled the silence. "Do you have any idea what it feels like?" he said, turning back to her. "To give up everything, my family, my friends, my country, for you? To believe in you when no one else did. And this is what I get in return." Meghan's expression softened for a brief moment, as if she wanted to say something that could stop it all. But instead, she crossed her arms again, retreating into herself. "You made those choices," she said quietly. "Don't put that on me." Harry froze. That sentence cut deeper than any confession could. He stepped closer, his voice raw now. "I made those choices because I believed in us, because I thought we were in this together. But clearly we're not." She looked down, her silence confirming what he already knew. "Was it emotional?" he asked. "Physical? Just tell me the truth." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. She blinked slowly, as if searching for an answer that could make sense of it all. Finally, she whispered, "It wasn't supposed to happen." Harry exhaled sharply. So it did happen. Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't fall. She wasn't the sobbing, regretful partner he might have imagined. She was composed, too composed. "You don't understand," she said softly. "I felt alone, Harry. You were distant, angry, distracted. You stopped seeing me." He shook his head. "That's not true." "It is," she said, her voice rising again. "You've been miserable for months. You resent me for everything. Leaving the royal family, the interviews, the book, the attention. You pretend you don't, but I see it. You think I ruined your life." He stared at her in disbelief. "You're turning this around? You betrayed me. And now you're trying to make yourself the victim." "I'm not the villain here," she said, her tone trembling now with frustration. "You don't get to play perfect while you've been pushing me away." "I pushed you away because I was trying to protect us," he shouted. "From the press, from the lies, from the circus that followed us everywhere. But it turns out, the real betrayal wasn't out there. It was right here, in this house." The room fell silent again. Both of them stood there, breathing heavily, their eyes locked in a battle of hurt and disbelief. Finally, Meghan spoke, her voice breaking slightly. "So what now? Are you going to kick me out? Is that what this is?" Harry's face hardened. "I don't know what else to do. I can't live like this anymore." Her jaw tightened. "You think this will fix things? Making me leave? You think the press won't twist that into something even worse?" "I don't care what the press says," he said firmly. "I care about the truth. And right now, the truth is that I can't even look at you without remembering those messages." Meghan took a step closer, her voice soft but sharp. "Be careful, Harry. Once you do this, there's no going back." He met her eyes, and for the first time he didn't see his wife. He saw a stranger. Someone he used to know, someone he had fought for, but who no longer stood on his side. "I know," he said quietly. "There shouldn't be." She stared at him for a long moment, as if searching for the man she once admired, the man who had defied the world for her. But all she saw was distance, pain, and finality. Without another word, she picked up her bag, walked to the door, and paused. The evening air swept in, cool and silent. She turned slightly, her voice trembling for the first time. "You'll regret this," she said. Harry didn't respond. He simply watched as she walked out, the sound of her heels fading down the path. When the door closed, the silence returned. Heavy, endless. Harry stood alone in the fading light, his heart pounding, his hands shaking. He had done it. Confronted her, heard the truth, and faced the collapse of everything he thought he knew. But there was no relief, only emptiness. He looked out the window, watching the sky turn dark. Somewhere beyond those hills, Meghan was driving away, and with her, the illusion of the life they had built. He whispered to himself, almost too softly to hear, "It's over," but deep down he knew it wasn't, because endings like this never stay quiet for long. Something inside him warned that this was only the beginning. The morning after the confrontation, Montecito was uncharacteristically quiet. The usual rhythm of the Sussex household, staff moving briskly through hallways, the faint clinking of dishes, the sound of Archie playing in the garden, had vanished. The house felt frozen, as though time itself had paused to witness the aftermath of what had happened the night before. Harry hadn't slept. He'd spent the entire night pacing, staring out at the Pacific horizon through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Every thought collided inside his head. The messages, the confrontation, the way Meghan's voice trembled when she said he'd regret it. But the more he replayed it, the clearer it became. There was no going back. He couldn't unsee what he'd seen or unhear what she had admitted. Just after sunrise, the decision crystallized. He picked up the phone and called his head of security. The conversation was short and precise, professional, cold, without emotion. "I need the property secured," he said quietly. "Effective immediately. Restrict all non-essential entries and exits. No exceptions." There was a pause on the line. "Understood, sir," the voice replied. "Is everything all right?" Harry hesitated. "No," he said finally, "but it will be." Within hours, the quiet hum of black SUVs began to fill the driveway. Men in dark suits moved discreetly, communicating through earpieces, their faces unreadable. They weren't there to handle paparazzi or royal threats this time. They were there to enforce something far more personal, a boundary between a husband and wife who had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. One of the senior guards, a man who had been with Harry since his army days, approached him privately. "Sir, do you want us to escort her off the premises, or?" Harry paused. The words felt heavy. He never imagined he would be in a position where he had to give an order like that. This wasn't Buckingham Palace protocol or royal duty. This was heartbreak made procedural. "She'll leave on her own," he said quietly. "But if she tries to come back without clearance, I want to be informed immediately." The guard nodded. "Understood." As they spoke, staff began quietly removing Meghan's personal effects from certain parts of the house. Her clothes, her jewelry boxes, her notebooks. Items that once filled the space with her presence were now being gathered neatly, respectfully, but decisively. Harry couldn't bear to watch. He stood at the top of the staircase, looking down as people carried pieces of her life out of the home they had built together. Each sound, the zip of a suitcase, the quiet murmur of instructions, cut deeper than the last. He remembered unpacking those same suitcases with her years ago when they first arrived. He remembered the laughter, the sense of adventure, the promise of starting fresh away from the shadows of royal life. Now, those memories were just ghosts passing through an empty house. Outside, the morning sun was harsh and unforgiving. Meghan had been staying at a nearby hotel since the previous night, but Harry knew she'd return soon. She'd never leave without trying to take control of the narrative. By late morning, her black SUV appeared at the gate. The security detail exchanged looks but followed orders. They called Harry first. "She's here," the guard said. Harry took a deep breath. "Let her in." When the car pulled up the driveway, Meghan stepped out slowly. She looked exhausted, but her expression was composed, almost defiant. Dressed simply, she carried no makeup, no jewelry, just determination. She walked toward the front door where Harry stood waiting, his arms folded, his face unreadable. "We need to talk," she said. "I think we've said enough," he replied. "I'm not leaving without my things." "They're being packed," he said. "You'll have them by tonight." Meghan's eyes narrowed. "You can't just lock me out of my own home, Harry." "It's not a home anymore," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "It's a house. And right now, it's not safe for either of us to stay under the same roof." Her jaw tightened. "So this is how it ends? You call security on me?" "I didn't want to," he said, pain flickering across his face. "But you gave me no choice." She shook her head, half laughing in disbelief. "You sound just like them." "Who?" he asked. "The royals. Your family. You've become exactly what you said you'd never be." Harry flinched at that. The words hit harder than any insult. "Don't bring them into this," he said. "This has nothing to do with them. This is about us. Or rather, what's left of us." Meghan's composure cracked slightly. "And what about the children, Harry? What about Archie and Lilibet? You think they won't feel this? You think you can just erase me from their lives because you're angry?" "I'm not erasing you," he said firmly. "But I'm protecting them. I don't want them growing up in a house built on lies." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the guards standing discreetly by the cars seemed frozen. Finally, Meghan, according to whispers that reached Harry through mutual contacts, the relationship had started professionally. Meetings turned into long phone calls. The phone calls turned into dinners. And somewhere along the line, the lines blurred. When the tabloids finally caught wind of it, the headlines were merciless. "Mystery man in Meghan's life? Sources say Sussex split may be imminent." Hollywood Insider or Homewrecker? Every gossip site and entertainment network wanted a piece of the story. Reporters camped outside hotels and restaurants, hoping to catch a glimpse of Meghan or the man whose name was now being whispered across the internet. Harry didn't need confirmation from the press. He had already seen enough. But the headlines made it impossible to escape. He woke up one morning to find an image splashed across multiple platforms. A grainy photo of Meghan in Los Angeles, stepping out of a car late at night, the same man opening the door for her. The caption beneath it was merciless. "Not so private after all." That image tore through him like glass. He closed his laptop and sat still for several minutes, his mind blank. There was no more doubt, no more guessing, no more waiting for explanations. The truth was now public, and that made it real in a way that no text message ever could. By afternoon, the calls started. First from his friends, then from his brother. William's name flashed on the screen again and again, but Harry couldn't bring himself to answer. What would he even say? That the woman he had defended against the world had betrayed him? That his decision to leave everything behind now looked like the biggest mistake of his life? Instead, he turned off the phone and went outside. The ocean stretched endlessly in front of him, calm and cruel. He remembered the early days in Montecito, the promise of a peaceful life, the laughter of their children, the feeling that they had finally found happiness on their own terms. It had all seemed so possible then. Now, even the air felt poisoned by lies. Later that evening, one of the security staff approached him cautiously. "Sir, we've received inquiries from the press about a man named Thomas Evans," he said. "They're linking him to Ms. Markle." Harry nodded. The name fit. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "Don't confirm or deny anything." But ignoring it didn't stop the flood. Within days, more photos surfaced. The man and Meghan, sitting together at a private cafe in Beverly Hills. Another image of them leaving a film studio. Rumors swirled that they had been developing a project together. A new documentary, a charity initiative, or perhaps something less official. Harry began to realize the depth of the deception. The meetings she'd mentioned, the late-night phone calls, the unexplained trips, it had all been with this man. Even the speeches and interviews she'd done recently had his company listed as one of the sponsors. It wasn't just personal. It was professional, entangled, calculated. He found himself staring at her old texts again, scrolling through the same thread, as if torturing himself with the evidence could make sense of it. You make me feel seen. I wish we had more time. Next time, no one will notice. Each line burned into him like fire. By now, even the palace had heard the whispers. Though Harry had severed official ties years ago, royal aides still monitored every story involving the Sussexes. Reports filtered quietly back to London. Senior members of the family were briefed. The reaction, while discreet, was predictable. Disappointment, concern, and behind closed doors, a sense of vindication. For Harry, the humiliation was total. It wasn't just about betrayal, it was about exposure. The whole world now knew that the love story he had sacrificed his birthright for was falling apart. And worse, it was falling apart publicly, the very thing he had tried so hard to avoid. One night, unable to sleep, he walked down to the edge of the property where the cliffs overlooked the sea. The moon hung low, casting silver light on the waves below. He thought about his mother, how the press had destroyed her privacy, how she'd fought for dignity until her last breath. And now he was living the same nightmare. But this time it wasn't the media's fault. It was the person he trusted most. He clenched his fists, anger mixing with heartbreak. How did it come to this? He muttered to himself. Behind him, one of the guards stood silently at a distance, watching over him but saying nothing. There were no royal protocols for heartbreak. No security detail could protect a man from betrayal. The next morning, Meghan broke her silence. She released a carefully worded statement through her publicist, calm, professional, and vague. She described the rumors as deeply hurtful and insisted that certain individuals are spreading false narratives for personal gain. But there was one line that caught everyone's attention. I have always been transparent about my work relationships, and I remain focused on my humanitarian goals. To the public, it sounded like a denial. To Harry, it sounded like another layer of spin. That evening, the two of them spoke on the phone for the first time since she had left the house. Her tone was cool but controlled. You didn't have to do this, she said. You didn't have to let it get out of hand. I didn't say a word to anyone, Harry replied. You did that yourself. She sighed, the line crackling softly. You think the world's going to pity you? They'll turn this against you, Harry. You know how it works. I don't care anymore, he said. Let them say whatever they want. The truth doesn't need defending. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said quietly, You've made your choice. I had no choice, he said. You made it for me. The call ended. Harry sat there for a long time afterward, staring at the dark screen. He realized that the story wasn't just about a mysterious man anymore. It was about the end of something sacred, the collapse of trust, the death of a bond that once defied the world. And as the waves crashed below the cliffs outside, he finally understood what it meant to lose everything. Not just the crown, not just his home, but the one person he thought would never turn her back on him. It didn't take long for Meghan to move from silence to strategy. For days, she had watched the headlines spiral, each one more explosive than the last. Photos of her late-night outings, rumors about the Hollywood producer, endless speculation about her marriage. It was the kind of storm she once claimed to rise above, but now she was its center. To the world, she looked exposed. To her, it was just another battle she had to control. From her temporary residence in Los Angeles, a private home loaned to her by a wealthy friend, Meghan began to rebuild her narrative. Public relations had always been her weapon of choice. She knew how quickly sympathy could shift if the story was framed the right way. So while Harry secluded himself in Montecito, silent and grieving, Meghan called her team. Within hours, her inner circle, PR agents, attorneys, stylists, and strategists, were gathered around her, phones buzzing, laptops open, crafting what they called the response. The room was dimly lit, curtains drawn to keep photographers at bay. Meghan sat at the head of the long table, her hands clasped tightly together, her gaze fixed. She looked composed, but the tension around her was electric. Her publicist, a sharp-tongued woman named Lydia, spoke first. The rumors are everywhere now. We can't stop them, but we can redirect them. The focus needs to shift away from the so-called affair. Meghan nodded slowly. To what? To your victimhood, Lydia replied bluntly. We lean on the emotional narrative. The pressure, the betrayal, the unfair treatment by both the media and the royal establishment. You don't deny directly, but you don't admit either. You position yourself as a woman attacked by forces that never wanted you to succeed. It was a playbook Meghan knew well. She had used it before, against tabloids, against palace aides, even against her own family. It always worked, at least for a while. But this time it felt different. This wasn't about public opinion or popularity. This was about Harry, and she wasn't sure if even the best narrative could win him back. Still, she pressed on. We'll do it, she said. Draft something that feels raw but dignified. No bitterness. Just truth. Your truth, Lydia corrected. By midnight, the statement was ready. It was polished to perfection. Emotional, vague, and strategically worded to invite empathy while avoiding accountability. It read, I am deeply saddened by the false and hurtful stories circulating in the media. As anyone who has ever been in the public eye knows, private struggles are often twisted into salacious headlines that bear no resemblance to reality. My focus remains on my children and the work that brings me purpose. I ask for privacy and compassion as our family navigates this difficult period. The statement hit every note. Sorrow, restraint, maternal concern, moral integrity. It didn't address the alleged affair or the mystery man. It didn't mention Harry at all. But it was designed to make her look like the wronged one, a mother under attack by a ruthless media. By dawn, the message had been sent to major outlets. Within hours, it was everywhere, on news websites, morning shows, celebrity gossip segments. Headlines softened. Meghan breaks silence on false rumors. Markle pleads for compassion amid speculation. A mother's pain. Meghan responds with grace. The spin worked, at least for the public. But behind closed doors, it enraged Harry. When he saw the statement on his phone, his hands shook. The quiet anger that had been simmering inside him erupted into disbelief. False stories? He muttered under his breath. Twisted headlines? He couldn't believe what he was reading. This wasn't damage control, it was gaslighting. He called her immediately. She didn't answer. The call went to voicemail. He tried again. Still nothing. Hours later, she finally sent a message. I'm not doing this over the phone, it read. Harry threw the phone on the couch and ran his hands over his face. He had spent his life avoiding public spectacle, fighting to protect his privacy. Now, his personal heartbreak was being turned into a PR performance. By evening, the news cycle had shifted completely. Television pundits were dissecting her words, debating her tone. Some sympathized. Others called it manipulation. But the one thing everyone agreed on was that Meghan was once again dominating the conversation. In London, the royal family watched quietly. A senior palace aide was overheard saying, "She hasn't changed. She's controlling the story again." Another added, "Harry's paying the price for believing he could outrun this." And they were right, because while Meghan's team worked tirelessly to shape her image, Harry was left alone with the fallout. Every headline felt like an accusation, every rumor another cut. He refused interviews, refused public appearances, and remained locked away in Montecito with his thoughts. But the more Meghan pushed her narrative, the more cracks began to appear in her own armor. Reporters started digging into the producer's background. Paparazzi camped outside his home, eager for proof. Photos surfaced, some old, some new, showing the two together in ways that contradicted her statement. Late-night dinners, hotel entrances, whispered moments captured through blurry lenses. Each new image chipped away at her credibility. Then a bombshell leaked. An anonymous source, someone close to the producer, spoke to a major entertainment outlet. They weren't just friends, the source said. They were involved emotionally for months. Everyone knew, but no one wanted to say it. The report went viral within hours. Meghan's team scrambled to contain it. Lydia drafted follow-up statements, but they sounded defensive and hollow. The producer, under growing pressure, shut off his phone and refused to comment. For the first time, Meghan's control was slipping. She sat in her living room that night, staring at the glowing TV screen as anchors dissected her life. The calm she projected to the world cracked in private. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured herself a drink, her eyes red from exhaustion. She knew what was coming. The sympathy she had engineered was fading fast. The press that once adored her had turned. And now she was alone, truly alone, for the first time in years. Still, she wasn't ready to surrender. She never was. The next morning, Meghan called her lawyer. "If they want a war," she said quietly, "they'll get one." But she didn't realize that this war wouldn't just be against the media, or even Harry. It would be against herself. Because no matter how much she tried to rewrite the story, the truth was already out there, spreading faster than any press release could contain. And back in Montecito, Harry was preparing his own response. Not a statement, not a denial, but something far more powerful. Because for the first time since the chaos began, he wasn't afraid of what people thought. He was ready to speak. Not for sympathy, not for image, but for truth. And when he did, it would shake the royal world again. Back in London, the air inside Buckingham Palace was cold and tense. Though Prince Harry and Meghan had long stepped away from their royal duties, the ripples of their choices continued to crash against the institution they left behind. Every scandal, every headline, every whispered rumor about them still carried the royal family's name. And this time, the situation was far worse than anyone at the palace had imagined. The crisis began quietly. Senior aides gathered in the private communications room early that morning, their faces drawn and tired. The tabloids were everywhere, front pages, morning talk shows, even the international press. Meghan's alleged affair, Harry's heartbreak, the Montecito meltdown. It was a public relations nightmare, not just for Harry, but for the House of Windsor itself. An emergency briefing was scheduled for that afternoon. Around the long, polished oak table sat the most powerful figures in the monarchy's machinery. Press secretaries, advisors, family liaisons, and senior courtiers. The question that hung over them was simple but dangerous. How should the palace respond? The king had already been informed earlier that morning. Charles had read the papers in silence, his expression unreadable. After a few long minutes, he had simply placed the newspaper down and said quietly, "Find out what's true and what isn't." It wasn't anger in his tone, nor even disappointment, just fatigue. He had seen this story before, decades ago, with Diana. And now, history was repeating itself, only this time, it was his own son at the center of it all. Across town, Prince William had received the news through a trusted aide before the tabloids even hit the stands. He had known something was coming. There had been whispers for weeks, but the details still shocked him. For a long time, he just stared out the window of his Kensington office, remembering the last time he and Harry spoke. Their conversations had been strained, sharp-edged, filled with old wounds that never healed. But despite all the tension, William had never stopped hoping his brother would find peace. Now that hope felt hollow. He turned to his private secretary. "No comment," he said firmly. "We won't feed this." The secretary nodded, jotting down the instruction. But William wasn't finished. "And tell the communications team to keep an eye on what comes out of Montecito. If he needs help, if he reaches out, let me know immediately." He paused, his voice lower now. "But don't let anyone know that." While the palace machinery worked to contain the storm, the Queen consort, Camilla, reportedly expressed her frustration behind closed doors. "Every time there's peace, something pulls this family back into chaos," she said to a friend over afternoon tea. "It's never ending." In the corridors of power, the older courtiers murmured the same thing. Harry had become an unpredictable element, a royal liability. They couldn't control him, couldn't silence him, and now they couldn't protect him either. Every scandal he fell into reflected on the monarchy, whether he liked it or not. A palace aide later leaked that there were two schools of thought among the royal advisors. One side argued that they should publicly distance the family from the Montecito drama, make it clear that Harry and Meghan were private citizens, responsible for their own mess. The other side believed that silence would look cruel, even cowardly. After all, no matter the distance, Harry was still the king's son. The debate grew heated, but ultimately the first strategy won. The monarchy's golden rule, never complain, never explain, would prevail once again. And so, an official statement was drafted. Short, polished, and carefully worded. The royal family remains focused on their duties and service to the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. Matters concerning the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are personal and will not be commented upon further. It was the palace's way of saying everything without saying anything. But inside those walls, things weren't so calm. Prince William reportedly sent a private message to his father that evening. The contents were never made public, but palace insiders claim it was both concerned and measured. He was worried about Harry's well-being, about his isolation, his growing distrust of everyone around him. "He's on his own now," William said, "and he's not built for that." The king responded simply, "He made his choices, but he's still my son." Meanwhile, Harry's cousin, Princess Eugenie, one of the few royals who still kept contact with him, sent a message offering quiet support. She didn't ask questions or mention Meghan by name. She just wrote, "I'm here if you need to talk." For Harry, that small gesture meant more than she could know. Back in Montecito, news of the palace's non-response reached Harry within hours. He read the statement twice, then put the phone down slowly. He understood the message behind the words. He was on his own. The family had drawn its line just as he had drawn his. There would be no intervention, no rescue, no olive branch. Still, part of him couldn't help but feel the sting of abandonment. It wasn't that he expected public defense. It was that, for all his rebellion, he had never truly stopped being his mother's son. Somewhere deep down, he had hoped someone in the family would reach out privately, not as royalty but as family. That hope began to fade as the days passed. But behind the scenes, something was shifting. Palace insiders began feeding small, selective leaks to trusted journalists, an old tactic to control the narrative. Subtle phrases appeared in reports. "The royal family is deeply saddened by recent developments. Concerns have been raised for the Duke's well-being. The king wishes his son privacy and healing during this difficult time." The tone was sympathetic, deliberate, human. It wasn't a defense of Harry, but it was a lifeline, a quiet acknowledgement that he still mattered. In London, William began having late-night discussions with his closest advisors. His wife, Catherine, listened quietly as he spoke about the crisis. "He's hurting," William said one night. "Whatever's happened, it's gone too far. Maybe it's time I speak to him." Catherine nodded. "If anyone can reach him, it's you." But reaching Harry wouldn't be easy. The gulf between them had grown wide, not just from distance but from pride, anger, and the unspoken grief of years lost.